The Great War, World War I. This massive fight between empires pulled the world into a terrible nightmare. Millions of people saw horrors almost too hard to understand. Imagine the dark, cold trenches, a festering wound cut across the land. Over the next hour we're going to take you into those trenches, into the tunnels, onto the battlefields, to look at the worst jobs of the Great War. These are the stories of the brave men who lived and often died doing what needed to be done. Imagine the trenches after a long artillery attack. It looked like something from hell. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, poop, and death. And in this nightmare, someone had to clean it up. The trench cleaner. Not a fun job. These men had to remove the garbage of war, the literal and figurative crap that piled up in the trenches. Think about it. The rotting bodies of your friends often left where they died for days. The waste of tens of thousands of men crammed into a narrow, muddy ditch. And all of it, a breeding ground for sickness, dysentery, typhus, cholera. These were the hidden enemies hiding in the filth. And the trench cleaner, he faced them all every single day. Armed with just a shovel and a bucket, they waded into this mess. Their reward, a slightly less terrible place to live for their fellow soldiers. And the constant risk of getting sick, of dying from the very diseases they fought. It was a job nobody wanted, a job many refused, but it had to be done. Keeping the trench clean, keeping the men's spirits up, often depended on the grim work of the trench cleaner. They were the unsung heroes of the trenches. Imagine the battlefield, so much noise. The air is thick with smoke, the ground shakes with every explosion, and the cries of soldiers echo through the chaos. The loud roar of artillery, the bursts of machine gun fire, the screams of the wounded. It's a symphony of destruction, a cacophony of war. And in all of this, a lone figure, running. The runner, a solitary silhouette against the backdrop of chaos, moving with purpose and urgency. The human way to communicate before radios. These runners were the lifeline, the vital link between command and the front lines. Their job, to carry messages, orders, important information from one place to another. They were the messengers of life and death. Sounds easy, right? Not in the killing fields of the Western Front. Here every step was a gamble with fate. These men, often very young, had to run across open ground, dodging artillery shells, machine gun fire, and sniper bullets. Each moment was a test of their courage and agility. All while carrying a message that could save their comrades' lives. The weight of responsibility was immense, the stakes incredibly high. The odds were against them. The battlefield was a deadly maze, and survival was never guaranteed. Every step could be their last. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and it could all be over. One well-placed bullet, one exploding shell, and it was over. And yet, they ran. They ran with a determination that defied the odds. Driven by duty, by adrenaline, by the hope that their message would arrive in time. They were fueled by a sense of purpose that transcended fear. Imagine the pressure on them, the weight of their mission, the constant threat of death, the relentless pace, knowing that the lives of hundreds, maybe thousands, depended on them. Each message was a lifeline, a thread of hope in the midst of despair, and all the while explosions all around them. Some carried written messages carefully protected from the elements and the chaos. Others memorized their orders, their minds the only way to carry the information. Their memory had to be flawless, their focus unbreakable. And when they reached their destination, often gasping for air, soaked in sweat and sometimes blood, they delivered their message. Their mission, though perilous, was accomplished. And then, without a break, they often turned around and ran back into the danger to report that the message had been received. Their duty was relentless, their bravery unmatched. Runners didn't live very long. Their life expectancy was tragically short, their sacrifice immense, but their courage, their dedication to duty, played a vital role in the war. They were the unsung heroes, the silent warriors who bridged the gap between chaos and command. Under the mud, the blood, and the craziness of the trenches, another war raged. This was a war fought not in the open air, but deep beneath the Earth's surface, hidden from the eyes of the world above. A war fought in almost total darkness, a tight, closed-in struggle where the enemy was the Earth itself, as much as it was the men facing you. The claustrophobic environment added to the terror, making every moment a test of endurance and courage. This was the world of the tunnelers, brave souls who ventured into the unknown armed with little more than their tools and their wits. Volunteers, often minors in civilian life who risked their lives digging tunnels under the enemy lines. These men brought their expertise from the mines to the battlefield, transforming their peacetime skills into instruments of war. Their mission to plant explosives under enemy trenches, creating huge craters and causing chaos. The precision required was immense, as a single miscalculation could lead to disaster. Imagine crawling through a narrow tunnel, the air thick with sweat, dirt, and fear. The walls closing in on you, every breath a struggle, every movement a challenge, the only light a flickering candle or a dim lantern making scary shadows on the walls. These small flames were their only companions in the darkness, casting eerie shapes that danced with every flicker. Above you, tons of earth, held back by wood, ready to crush you at any moment. The weight of the world literally pressing down, a constant reminder of the perilous nature of their work. And all around you, silence, broken only by your own breathing and the scrape of your tools. The quiet was both a comfort and a curse, amplifying every sound, every heartbeat. The work was exhausting, terrifying, and often deadly. Each day was a battle against fatigue, fear, and the ever-present threat of death. Tunnels could collapse, and the enemy was always listening, always looking for signs of digging. The constant threat of discovery added another layer of tension to their already fraught existence. One mistake could be a disaster, a single error in judgment, a moment of inattention, and the tunnel could become a tomb. And then there was the mental strain. The psychological toll of working in such conditions was immense, pushing even the strongest minds to their limits. The isolation, the darkness, the constant fear of being buried alive or running into an enemy patrol in the tunnels. These fears haunted the tunnelers, day and night. But the tunnelers kept going, their determination was unyielding, their resolve unbreakable. Driven by a sense of duty, by the friendship between men who faced death together in the dark. The bonds they formed were unbreakable, forged in the crucible of war. They dug their tunnels, planted their explosives, and hoped they would live to see daylight again. Their work was vital. Each explosion they set off was a testament to their bravery and skill. The massive explosions they created could change the course of battles. These blasts were not just physical disruptions but strategic game-changers, altering the landscape of war. Few weapons are as hated as poison gas. Using it in World War I was a new low, making the already terrible war even worse. And on the front lines of this new kind of warfare were the gas mask testers, men with the awful job of making sure gas masks worked. Imagine being ordered into a sealed room, the air full of the smell of chlorine or phosgene or mustard gas. Your only protection, a simple gas mask, that might not even work. Every breath is a risk. One bad valve, one poorly fitted mask, and you could be on the ground, your lungs burning, your skin blistering, as the poison gas kills you. The early gas masks weren't very good, and the testing was often rushed and dangerous, putting the testers at huge risk. Many died from the gas. But as the war went on, the technology got better. Gas masks improved, offering more protection, and the testers, through trial and error, through their willingness to risk their lives, helped to perfect these life-saving devices. Their job was secret, their sacrifices often forgotten. In the middle of the chaos, amidst all the death on the battlefields, there was another sound, a sound that pierced through the cacophony of war, a sound that was both a plea and a command, a desperate cry for help, for mercy, for a little more life. It was a cry that could not be ignored, a cry that demanded immediate attention. It was the cry of the wounded, the injured, the fallen. Each cry was a story of pain, a story of survival, a story of hope amidst despair. And it was the Frontline Medic who answered that call. These brave souls, armed not with guns but with medical kits, rushed into the fray to save lives. These were the men who faced the horrors of war, not with a weapon, but with the tools of healing. They carried bandages, morphine, and the hope of survival. Their battlefield was the aid station, their weapons, bandages, and morphine, their enemy death itself. They fought tirelessly to save every life they could. Imagine the scene inside one of these aid stations. The air thick with the smell of blood, antiseptic, and gangrene. The atmosphere was a mix of urgency and despair. The air thick with the smell of blood, antiseptic, and gangrene. The groans of the wounded, a constant heartbreaking sound. Every corner of the station was filled with the echoes of pain and suffering. The groans of the wounded, a constant heartbreaking sound. The medics moved swiftly, their hands steady despite the chaos around them. And in this house of death, the medics worked tirelessly, desperately trying to stop death. They performed triage, deciding who could be saved and who was beyond help. They treated terrible wounds, injuries that would make anyone sick. Shrapnel wounds, bullet holes, and burns were common sights. Amputations were common, performed without modern painkillers, the screams of the patients showing the brutality of war. Each amputation was a race against infection and death. But it wasn't just the physical part that weighed on the medics. The emotional toll was immense. They had to stay strong, even when their hearts were breaking. It was the emotional burden. The constant exposure to death and suffering took a heavy toll on their mental health. Seeing so much death, so much suffering, took its toll. They had to find ways to cope, to keep going despite the overwhelming grief. They saw the best and worst of humanity, incredible courage and selflessness, men willing to die for their friends. They witnessed acts of heroism that would be remembered for generations. Incredible courage and selflessness, men willing to die for their friends. The bonds formed in the trenches were unbreakable, forged in the fires of war. But they also saw the horrors that men inflict upon one another. The brutality of war, the senseless violence, the destruction of lives and dreams. And through it all, they kept going. The frontline medics, the unsung heroes of the battlefield, persevered through unimaginable hardship, driven by a singular purpose: to save lives. We've looked into the darkest parts of the Great War, explored the terrible jobs that most of us can't even imagine. From the trenches to the tunnels, from the gas chambers to the aid stations, we've seen the war through the eyes of the men who had the worst jobs imaginable. These weren't the generals, safe in their headquarters, or the pilots flying high above. These were the men in the mud and the blood, the men who faced death every day. And yet, they kept going. Their stories show how strong the human spirit can be, how much courage and selflessness is possible even in the darkest of times. Remember these men, honor their sacrifice, and next time you see footage of the Great War, remember, behind the numbers, behind the casualty figures, are the stories of individual people who lived and died in that conflict.